Mass General for 17 years. I am now a member of MAPA, and I'm very grateful to be here today with all of you. The co-hosts on this webinar are Abby Yanau and Paul Shannon. So thank you very much. Most importantly, I'd like to introduce our speaker this evening, Dr. Feroze Sidhwa. He is a general and trauma and critical care surgeon working in California. Also a humanitarian surgeon who has worked in the Ukraine, Zimbabwe, Burkina Faso, Palestine, and most recently 2 weeks of work at a hospital in Gaza in this past year. And so we're going to hear about that. He has, in addition to having this experience, he has widely published in medical literature and in lay literature on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and on medical care in Gaza right now. He published most recently, or I don't know if this is most recently, there may have been something after this, but what we were looking at was in October, an article in the op-ed section of the New York Times. I'm sure a lot of you saw that. 65 different physicians were talking about their experiences in Gaza, working in Gaza. So thank you very much for being here with us tonight. Thank you all for being here. And we look forward to your words.
Great. Thanks for having me. I actually did my residency in Boston at Boston Medical Center. So it's, and I've been on the Mass Peace Action listserv for a long time. So when I got an email, I said, oh, great, it's just another Massachusetts Peace Action email. But then it was, oh, would you like to come talk? I was like, oh, great, that's awesome. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, great. Actually, just not as a correction, but just to point out the depravity of our own society. I actually, the most recent thing I published was an article in a journal called Foreign Policy, probably in November. Yeah, it was in early November, mid-November, with a friend of mine. Actually, we went to Johns Hopkins together, named Sarah Parkinson. She's now the Aronson Chair of International something studies at the School of Advanced International Studies in Washington, D.C., the Johns Hopkins School of International Studies. We published a call to action pointing out that the winter rains in Gaza are very likely to kill tens or even hundreds of thousands of people this year, just because of what's been done to the society over the past year and a half. Not a single media outlet was interested, and it's not that they didn't know about it. The Johns Hopkins media office is extremely active because Michael Bloomberg wants to take credit for anything that he can. So they stuff this stuff down the faces of CNN, ABC, NBC. Neither she nor I got a single corporate media contact that was interested in talking about the possibility of the United States killing tens of thousands of primarily children by starving them to death, letting them die of hypothermia. Tells us something about ourselves and how important groups like this actually really are. There we go. So even in a peace action group like this, it's common that people don't really know a whole lot about the Gaza Strip. I'm sorry if you can hear what's going on outside. I work in a county hospital. It's pretty loud. The main comprehensive book about Gaza's recent political history that people might have read starts with, this book is not about Gaza. It's about what has been done to Gaza. And similarly, this talk really isn't about Gaza or healthcare in Gaza. It's about what is being done to Gaza, and more importantly, what we are doing to Gaza. And it's kind of impossible to understand what happened on October 7th, and then certainly afterwards, without understanding what Gaza was on October 6th of 2023. So Gaza is a really small place, as I'm sure you're all aware. It's basically the size of metropolitan Philadelphia. It's incredibly small. It's the length of a jog and or excuse me, it's the length of a marathon and the width of a quick jog. It's an extremely densely populated place. Most of the strip, or the main populated part of the strip before October 7th was Gaza City, the northern environs of the strip. And that was more densely populated than New York City, and obviously without its incredible municipal services or the height of New York's buildings. Overall, even including the previously unpopulated parts of the strip, it has a higher population density than Boston, about 15,000 people per square mile. Uh, there we go. Gaza is also an incredibly poor place. It's one of the poorest places in the world. Before October 7th, I'm referring to October 7th, 2023, obviously, but before October 7th, 46% of the population was unemployed, 60% of the youth were unemployed, and about 80% of the population was dependent on humanitarian aid just for bare survival. More importantly, this situation, this level of depravity, had been going on for 11 years now, ever since Operation Protective Edge in 2014. So it was not exactly a recent development or a new situation in Gaza's history. This is a prolonged issue of a lack of human dignity, as the International Committee for the Red Cross once put it. Gaza is largely a refugee population and the descendants of refugees. In 1948, it's estimated that 250,000 Palestinian refugees were expelled from what became Israel into Gaza, overwhelming the 80,000 inhabitants that actually live there. And today, refugees and their descendants make up about 70% of the territory's population. Gaza is also incredibly young. It's one of the youngest territories in the world. Half of the population is under 18. 40% are under the age of 15, and 15% are under the age of 5. Almost nobody is over the age of 60, which is pretty striking when you're there. It's kind of obvious. Gaza has historically been a very stiff source of resistance to the Israeli occupation, both unarmed and armed. After Israel conquered the Strip in 1967, it began an intensive campaign. It was led by Ariel Sharon at the time. He was the head of the IDF Southern Command. And by 1971, Israel had broken the armed resistance in Gaza, the Fedayeen resistance. In 1987, the first Intifada started in Gaza, and it was overwhelmingly nonviolent from the first to the last. But it was met with tremendous violent repression. I'm sure many of you actually remember it. The Intifada was repressed by 1993. In 2000, the second Intifada broke out, also initially overwhelmingly nonviolent. It's important to remember that the first suicide bombings didn't happen for several weeks into actually several months into the second Intifada. It was repressed by 2004, approximately. Israel withdrew its settlers and military forces from the Strip in 2004 and redeployed its military around Gaza's periphery. And thereafter followed periodic Israeli attacks on Gaza to quell ongoing resistance to the occupation and the subsequent siege and blockade of Gaza. The list is too long to run through, and I'll show it to you in a moment. Gaza has been under what's called military occupation in one form or another since 1948, first Egyptian and then Israeli. What this has meant for the territory is very well captured by these four resources. The first one is a report from the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. It's from 2017. It discusses the humanitarian impact of the first 50 years of the Israeli occupation, 1967 to 2016. The second source is a book written by Edith Sertal and Akiva Eldar. The first is an Israeli historian at the Institute of Jewish Studies at the University of Basel in Switzerland, and the other was at that time the chief political columnist and editorial writer for Haaretz, Israel's most important newspaper by a good margin. It covers a major aspect of the occupation, which is the settlement enterprise and the systematic and forced displacement of the Palestinians that it entails. That third book, the bottom left, I think is the most important book that's ever been written about Gaza. It's on the slow and steady destruction, the deliberate slow and steady destruction of the Palestinian economy, with the obvious effects that that kind of project would have when sustained across generations. The book's written by Sarah Roy. She's Harvard's probably the world's leading expert on Gaza, certainly on Gaza's economy. She's also the daughter of Holocaust survivors. The fourth book is a standard history of the Arab-Israeli conflict by Israel's leading historian, a very right-wing figure, incidentally, Benny Morris. As he notes, I'm quoting him, like all occupations, Israel's was founded on brute force, repression, and fear, collaboration and treachery, beatings and torture chambers, and daily intimidation, humiliation, and manipulation. He goes on, noting, quoting, the protracted state of political subjugation and economic dependence and the day-to-day realities of military occupation meant a continuous trampling on the basic rights and dignity of the inhabitants of the occupied territory. Israeli propagandists tried to project an image of an enlightened occupation, but in fact, it was always a brutal and mortifying experience for the occupied, as well as a brutalizing experience for the occupiers. Gaza has been subjected to a unique process in world history, at least as far as I know, called de-development. The phrase was coined by Sarah Roy in that book. In words she originally wrote about 30 years ago and that were certainly ignored, I'm quoting, despite its contentious and distinctive history, Gaza has consistently been neglected by Middle East scholars. However, and this is where it's important, not just for what's happened, but what's going to happen in the future. However, it is important to examine Gaza because the Strip provides a stark clarification of the intentions as well as the consequences of Israeli policy. Gaza reveals poignantly the lineament and the texture of Israel's occupation, its harsh exterior and banal underside, its unique form and particularistic substance. Gaza dispels the myriad myths and illusions consistently invoked to legitimize Israeli control and depicts the bleakness of the future in which that control is allowed to persist. Anyone who wants to know what this tiny crowded patch of land was on October 6th, really, I would encourage you to read this book. Gaza is also blockaded, which again is unique in the modern world. Since 2007, the Strip's been under a land, air, and sea blockade. It's been in place for 16 years now, 17 years, I guess now. This has had a major destructive impact on the standard of living and has destroyed Gazan society's ability to provide to itself the necessities of life. If someone wants the details, these are probably the two best sources to look at. The first one on the left is by an American Jewish political scientist named Norman Finkelstein. He's also the child of Holocaust survivors, and the book on the right is the one by Roy that I've mentioned several times. So in summary, in many ways, Gaza is unique. It's a compact, remarkably poor, incredibly young, highly repressed, occupied territory, subjected to economic de-development and outright blockade, processes that have played out over 57 years, which is longer than almost everyone there has been alive. The large majority of the Strip's population has never known anything beyond the harshest phase of this history, which is the blockade and the periodic military assaults on Gaza since 2004. You can see a list of them here. It's quite extensive. And if maybe the right side of it, maybe the Zoom stuff is blocking it on the far right side. But the last one on the right, that was in 2023, Operation Shield and Arrow, is not actually the Israeli response to the October 7th attacks. That's actually an Israeli attack on Gaza that took place in May. It wasn't even reported on in the United States. Nobody, I doubt most of the people listening right now have ever even heard of it, and you're all in the middle of a peace coalition. So what was the healthcare system in, or what is Gaza now? Well, today, Gaza is the deadliest place for civilians and aid workers in the world, according to the International Rescue Committee. Sorry. 86% of Gaza is currently a no-go zone, meaning it's been cut off from it's anybody there is assumed to be a combatant and is liable to be killed. The Gaza Strip is today, this is according to UNICEF, Gaza is once again the most dangerous place in the world to be a child. I stress once again, the rate of killing of children in Gaza is really not a well understood phenomenon. It's even if you just go by the official numbers from the Ministry of Health, which anybody with a brain can understand that there a major undercount of even just violent deaths. But even if you just go by their numbers, you find some pretty shocking things. In 2022, which is when Russia invaded Ukraine, and that was when I started going there, invaded the mainland of Ukraine. In 2022, 732 Ukrainian children were killed by armed conflict in Ukraine, a country of 39 million people under attack by Russia, a superpower. That's the nuclear armed massive army superpower. In the same amount of time, in the Gaza Strip, something like 12,000 children were killed out of a population of 2 million people. If you do the math, the rate of killing of children in Gaza is 600 times higher than it is in Ukraine. Now, I was on a webinar yesterday with somebody, and he complained that I wasn't pointing out that the Ukrainian population is only 15% children, and in Gaza it's 50%. Well, yeah, that's true. So if you want to say that accounts for 3 times of those 600 times, that's fine. But still, so, I would accept the correction and say that the rate of killing of children in Gaza is 597 times higher than it is in Ukraine. And it's important to remember that Ukraine was actually the worst country in the world for children in armed conflict before Gaza. So we're talking about a totally different order of magnitude than anything else that is being done in the world. And I stress that's going by the official numbers. The real numbers are almost certainly much worse. We just don't know what they are. Gaza is the deadliest place to be a journalist in the world, and by a huge margin. More journalists have been killed just in Gaza since October 7th than in all of World War II. In most of the world's conflicts in the past 10 years, and it's not even a close call. And again, that's going by the Committee to Protect Journalists, a New York-based, going by their numbers. If you go by the numbers of the Palestinian Journalist Syndicate, it's actually almost double that. Gaza has been physically destroyed far worse than Aleppo in Syria, Mariupol in Ukraine, or even Dresden and Rotterdam during World War II. That's according to the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Housing. The current estimates are that there are 45 million tons of rubble in Gaza. There is actually more there, just on an absolute basis, tons. There's more rubble in Gaza from this conflict than there is in all of Ukraine. Again, Ukraine is twice the size of Texas. Gaza, actually, it's more than twice the size of Texas. Gaza is the size of metropolitan Philadelphia. It's a shocking level of destruction for such a small place. It's very almost, you could use the term impressive if you didn't get the wrong impression. Gaza is the thirstiest place in the world, and by a very wide margin. This is all according to that Oxfam report that's written down there. It's called Water War Crimes. It's very worth reading. Since October 7th, Oxfam estimates for all of Gaza, there have been 4.7 liters of water per person per day available. And that's not for drinking. That's for all uses: drinking, cooking, cleaning, bathing, toileting, etc. In the Mawasi area, which is the western edge of Gaza on the Mediterranean Sea, I've been there. It's basically just the beach of Gaza. There's no infrastructure because it's just sand. In the Mawasi, when there were 500,000 people there, Oxfam, which was when the report was written, Oxfam estimated that there were 2.5 liters of water per person per day available there, none of it fit for human consumption, and one toilet for every 4,132 people. There were 121 toilets in this area, and there were 500,000 people. Today, there are 1.8 million people there. So, and the numbers of toilets obviously hasn't changed. This is actually what prompted me and Sarah to write that foreign policy article that I mentioned, because, without being too crude, I apologize, but the whole population of Gaza has been defecating in the open for the entire past year because the entire sewage system has been destroyed. So now when Gaza floods every winter, which it does, it periodically floods, and now the entire population is homeless and living on the ground. It's true that most of them have temporary shelters, temporary tents built over them made of wood and tarp, but nothing else. And you can find plenty of videos showing you exactly what happens when those tents flood. The whole tent just floods. Well, that water isn't just rainwater; it's rainwater caked in sewage. And you can imagine what's going to happen to people that are not only been malnourished for a year, but half of a child population. It's going to be a disaster. Gaza is the hungriest place in the history of the modern world. And I know that seems like an extreme statement, but it's actually true. If you look at all of the reports that have come out from the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, that's the major technical group that monitors food insecurity in the world. It's funded by the United States, Canada, Britain, and the EU. They show quite convincingly that there has never been a place that is even on an absolute basis been as hungry as the Gaza Strip. In their last report, they pointed out that 86% of the population is in what are called the P3 plus phases of food insecurity. Phase one is everything's fine. Phase two, it's harder for a family. They classify these things at the household level, so they talk about families. At phase two, it's harder for a family to find food, but they have compensatory mechanisms that work. So you sell some clothes and you find enough food. You pick up an extra job and you find some food, whatever it might be. Phase three is where which is what 86% of Gaza is in phase three or worse. Phase three is where you can't find enough food and it's such a bad deficit that mortality actually increases. So 86% of Gaza is being starved. There's no other place in the world where 86% of a population of a territory is being starved. It's just totally outrageous. And leaving aside that it's 100% man-made. Gaza is probably the most wounded place in the world, but it's pretty hard to find comparative statistics. There's well over 100,000 seriously wounded people in Gaza. Remember, it's a country of it's a territory of 2.2 million, or it used to be a territory of 2.2 million people. And there are well over 1,000 pediatric amputees in Gaza. I can't imagine the number isn't much higher than that. When I was working at European Hospital, I met 24 pediatric amputees. So I have a hard time believing it's not worse than that, but that's just anecdote. And then finally, Gaza has suffered the most direct and sustained attack on a healthcare system really in the history of warfare. There's absolutely nothing even remotely like it. If somebody has even a remotely comparable example, I'd love to hear about it. More than 1,000 healthcare workers have been killed in Gaza. That's 1 out of every 20. And I just want to emphasize that's not aid workers. That's a separate category. This is just local healthcare workers. It's like I said, 5% of the workforce, 1 out of every 20 people. Try to imagine 1 out of 20 people at your workplace gone. 26 out of 36 hospitals and 60% of hospital beds have simply been destroyed. Every hospital has been attacked in one way or another. 81% of primary care clinics have been destroyed. Back in January, there was a geospatial satellite image analysis done by researchers in Canada, the US and Germany, and published in the British Medical Journal of Global Health. They found that there was, in the first month of the bombing campaign, there was no distinction whatsoever between hospitals and non-hospital buildings in Gaza. Statistically, they couldn't find any difference between attacks on one or the other. So I went to Gaza through the Palestinian American Medical Association. They kind of feed volunteers. It's a very small organization. It's just like 3 people, but they feed volunteers to the WHO in Gaza. And the WHO, just to highlight 2 points of their constitution, the first one is just boilerplate, but it says the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health is one of the fundamental rights of every human being, without distinction of race, religion, political belief, and economic or social condition. We can all agree on that. I think most people can. But the second one is more interesting. It says the health of all peoples is fundamental to the attainment of peace and security and is dependent on the fullest cooperation of individuals and states. I always, ever since I read that when I was doing my master's of public health, I've taken it to heart, and I think it's true, and it's one of the reasons that I'm motivated to do this work. So I'll just talk about 3 cases. I know this isn't a medical audience, so I've cut out the more graphic pictures, but still there are pictures of especially a wounded little girl coming up. If anybody wants to look away, please don't hesitate to do that. I'll just talk about these 3 cases because they kind of illustrate multiple different aspects of what's going on. So she was injured in an explosion, probably an airstrike, but who knows? The story was interesting. Her family lived in Khan Younis, which is where the hospital that I worked at. I worked at a hospital called European Hospital. It's a Palestinian hospital, but it's called European Hospital. She lived in Khan Younis with her mom and dad and siblings. And I was there during the Battle of Khan Younis. The Israelis demanded that their neighborhood be evacuated, so they evacuated south to Rafah to their grandparents' home. Mom and dad went out to find food, water, whatever they could. And when they came back, the home had been destroyed, and the neighbors told them, your kids are in these different hospitals, so go find them. So Juri came, this little girl's name is Juri. She came to European Hospital 2 weeks before I met her, right after that explosion happened. At that time, an external fixator, that's the pins that go in your leg, and then there's a bar on the outside to keep the bones steady while they heal. A left external fixator had been placed, and her wounds had been closed primarily. Now, one thing that is hard to explain to a non-medical audience is just that that was a terrible way to take care of these injuries. So one might, if you just accept my assertion of that, you might ask, well, why are these Palestinian doctors so bad at their job? Why didn't they just fix her properly? Well, actually, the orthopedic surgeon who was supposed to be on call was dead. And so the only people left to take care of her were residents and medical students. So they actually did this operation themselves, doing the best they can, but they're not really trained. So, they did the best they could. And to be, to their credit, they kept her alive until somebody who maybe knew a little bit more was able to arrive. So I don't know if you can see my mouse moving around, but in this picture on the left, if you look at the her right side of her temple, you can see how it's sunken in. That's from the nutritional wasting that she's having. You can also see the puffiness of her eyelids and her cheeks. Now, this is a form of malnutrition called kwashiorkor. It's quite severe. You can also see on the picture on the right with her little bracelet, where she's got these IV sites. You can see how my finger really dents her skin in. So she's really in a bad shape nutritionally. Now, this little girl just showed up in the preoperative area. That's when I took these pictures. And the nurse said, "Can you operate on her?" And I said, "No, I have no idea who she is. Of course I can't operate on her." And the nurse just shrugged and said, "Oh, okay." But as I looked at her and I realized nobody else was coming to take care of her, I realized she was dying of septic shock. And it was obvious that this was because of the injuries she had sustained, but I'd never met her before, so I didn't know what those were. When I tried to talk to her, I don't speak Arabic, so it was through a translator. When we tried to speak to her, she would just scream and cry out for her dad. She was not, I thought she was 5 years old, not 9. And she just wasn't acting like a normal child. And if you tried to examine her, she just shrieked in pain and terror. So we decided, her heart rate was very high, her blood pressure was very low, but she was going to die if we didn't do something. And we had a very good anesthesiologist there, a Palestinian anesthesiologist, and we convinced him that she should be anesthetized. So we took her to the operating room. I won't show you what it looked like when these bandages were off because it is very graphic, but just to describe it, her right arm was broken, but that was the least of her worries. Her left leg, you can see on the very edge of her left leg, those pins sticking out. That's the external fixator. The back part of her thigh, the hamstring, is missing a huge chunk of the muscle. And then on the front of her thigh as well. How her leg actually stayed attached to her, I have no idea. Her femur itself, the bone in the thigh, was missing about 2 inches. Her sciatic nerve was completely severed and missing about 2 inches. And then on both of her buttocks, especially her left buttock, she had an injury that was so deep that the lowest bones in her pelvis were actually exposed. It was just an absolutely dramatic injury. When we got these bandages off and turned her over onto her side, maggots fell out of these wounds all over the bed. It was just an absolutely horrendous situation. Well, actually, we were able to do some work on her. And we kind of assembled a team of 5 surgeons. So actually, I was thinking about the other day, it was actually 6 surgeons, 3 different anesthesiologists. And over the course of about 10 days, spending about 30 hours total, all of us together were able to get this girl in a much better shape. Her wounds were actually healing. She was actually able to eat again, and actually was quite enjoyable to see her personality resurface because, like I mentioned, she really would just cry out in pain and terror, and Wayne Baba just means where's dad. But once her personality resurfaced, she remembered that she's a quick-witted 9-year-old kid who really knew how to manipulate her dad very well. So she started saying, I'm not going to undergo any of this surgery nonsense unless you go get me honey melon and get me phone calls with my siblings. She's too young to understand that this is a land in famine and there's no cell service because it's been destroyed, and her siblings were all at a different hospital. But nevertheless, it was really amazing to see how much this man loved his child and how much he would try to find anything that would make her happy, no matter what he had to do to get it. Really goes against the stereotype that we hear of Palestinians, that they just want their children to die and they're all waiting for martyrdom and all sorts of other nonsense, that they're just basically not human. It really flew in the face of that, and it was a really nice thing to see, actually. Well, we had to shorten her left femur which means that she'll never be able to walk again, or at least not unless she gets about literally 24 surgeries over the course of her lifetime, which are definitely not going to be available to her. But at least she won't die of sepsis. So that was the first case. And the fact that her situation was just so bad when we found her was a combination of several things. One was the targeting of not just the healthcare system, healthcare workers, et cetera, but also just the destruction of the entire society, the starvation of the population, the targeting of civilians, et cetera, et cetera. The next case is a case of a gunshot wound followed by medical neglect and torture. This is in a 29-year-old man who happened to be a orthopedic nurse. His initial injury was probably in November of 2023. When I found him, he had osteomyelitis, which means infection of the bone itself, causing sepsis and non-healing of his bony fractures. And we'll get into the details of the rest. So this is Tummer. These are actually from his Facebook page. Tummer must have done quite well in high school because, like I mentioned, there's 60% youth unemployment in Gaza, which basically means 60% youth male unemployment. But he must have done quite well because he actually got admitted to the Palestine College of Nursing. And he afterwards, once he graduated and was working, started a family. It's hard to explain to people who don't really know the recent history of the Gaza Strip how lucky a young man has to be in this picture. Young men in a conservative Arab society don't get married if they don't have a job. If you don't get married, you don't have a family. And if you don't have a family, you don't have a future. For example, very likely that many of the people who volunteered for the October 7th attacks just didn't have families. They probably came from that 60% of the youth that are unemployed. Well, Tummer went on, and he actually did well in nursing school as well. At least I assume he did, because he got a very prestigious position. He was an orthopedic surgical nurse at the Indonesian hospital, which has been in the news recently because it was just completely destroyed. Well, when he was working in November of 2023, after the Hamas attack and the Israeli ground invasion had started in late October, he was doing an operation, and the Israeli soldiers at Indonesian hospital, Israeli soldiers invaded the hospital and demanded that he stop doing what he was doing. He said, "No, I can't do that. I have to finish the operation." So they shot him in his knee. Didn't take him for interrogation or anything at that moment, just to tell him who's boss. His own team picked him up, put this external fixator on him that you can see, and this is him in the hospital the next day. And you can see he's shaken. Obviously, this is not a pleasant thing for a human being to go through, but this is the kind of trauma that a person can get over. It was momentary. It's over with. The physical injuries will heal, and the mental healing can begin after that. But what happened next to Tummer is very different. The day after this picture was taken, the Israelis raided the hospital again, and they took him from his hospital bed, probably to sedate him, but nobody really knows. He has no idea. For 45 days, he was blindfolded continuously, strapped to a table, so badly that he actually had a pressure sore on the back of his head when he came in. He was fed a juice box every day or every other day, and he was beaten so badly that his right eye had to be enucleated when he came out of the hospital. Eventually, he was dumped naked on the side of a road, no help, nothing, until a Good Samaritan came by and brought him to European hospital. So this is what he looked like when he got out. You can see his right eye's been enucleated, the lacerations on his head and the bruising has been bandaged up. And you can see that the external fixator has been removed because he lost so much weight that he had no ability to fight off infections. And so the external fixator itself got infected. So this is him about a week before I met him, and this is him when I met him. When I met him, I thought he was 80 years old. He's 29. It's just, it's kind of a shocking thing to see a 29-year-old man who looks like this. When I met him, he still had persistent sepsis, so we assumed that it was from his pin sites, the old pin sites from where the external fixator had gone in, and it turned out to be right. We debrided them. We were able to give him some of the antibiotics that we had brought with us. That's Mark Perlmutter's hand with the betadine on the left side of the picture. And thankfully, we were able to get him a little bit better. And so when we left, this is what he looked like. You can see his right eye is gone. You can see that he's incredibly thin and wasted. You can see the wasting of his temporal muscles, of his cheeks, of his ankles. And, physically, obviously, he's significantly better than when we found him, but mentally and spiritually, he's a completely broken individual, and that's never going to change. What was done to him was just absolutely monstrous, and he has no way of recovering from it. I mean, mental health services might help, but even that has quite a limit. He doesn't know if his wife and children are alive or dead. He's actually in Egypt right now, and he's unbelievably paranoid about everything. He's absolutely sure that every Egyptian nurse is trying to kill him. It's just it's his mind has been completely destroyed. So what do these cases? Oh, sorry, I said it was three cases. It's really just two. So what do these cases illustrate? Well, the healthcare system is massively overwhelmed, both by enormous needs and also being undermined by direct attacks on healthcare workers and also healthcare facilities. This is continuing a long trend in modern, what you can call warfare. Syria, Yemen, Sudan, South Sudan, Ukraine, where attacks on healthcare facilities are just being normalized. But Gaza, or I should say Israel and Gaza, actually, I should say the US and Israel and Gaza, have really taken it to another level. There is no other case of destroying an entire healthcare system like this, um, and especially not in such plain view of the entire world. The malnutrition, the destruction of what's called WASH infrastructure, means water, sanitation, hygiene, and the overcrowding of the hospitals, which I didn't get into too much, are basically making surgical success or even medical success impossible. It's really quite silly to talk about medical success or the rebuilding of a healthcare system in a land that literally doesn't have a sewage system anymore. You're talking about taking a place back to like the early 1700s in terms of what a city used to look like and how healthy a city used to be to live in. And finally, it was possible for us to provide advanced care to a few people, even in this very resource limited setting, by using an extreme excess of surgeons, all of whom had a lot of humanitarian experience, a lot of real world experience. But it's completely impossible to provide it at what's at the needed public health level. Julie, I think you said you worked at Massachusetts General. You could duplicate Mass General. You could drop 10 of them into Gaza right now, and they'd all be overwhelmed. It's an incredible level of need that has been generated. And like I said, it's almost silly to talk about providing medicine to people who don't have a sewage system. So the people on this call are, I'm assuming, mostly Americans. And it's up to us to decide what kind of future Gaza is going to see. And it's kind of terrifying, but Gazans just don't have any say in the matter. And I think these two pictures illustrate what that choice is. The first was behind the nurses' station in the part of the hospital where I lived or slept. It says, "Enter this place with love and leave us with a beautiful smile." And Google Translate tells me the Arabic says the same thing. But the other one was right outside of Juri's room. Juri was that little 9-year-old girl. It says, "In Gaza, we don't care anymore about anything. We're going to have to decide which one of these two futures Gaza sees." And I think the choice that we should make is pretty obvious. This is Dr. Mahmoud Abu Najela. He was killed in an airstrike. He's a British Palestinian. He was actually working with Doctors Without Borders. His wife and children survive him in Oxford now. He was killed in an airstrike on the hospital where he was working in November of 2023. After this was Alawada Hospital, which is under attack again now. When the Israelis had finished rampaging through the hospital, this OR whiteboard with his signature on it was found. It says, "Whoever stays until the end will tell the story. We did what we could. Remember us." There was a good article written about this by Ariana Shavisi. She's an ethicist at the University of Sussex in Britain. And she said, "Who caused the scarcity?" That'll make sense in a moment. "These questions are firmly within the remit of this discipline, meaning medical ethics. We did what we could" are the words of doctors operating under conditions of extreme and devastating scarcity. And she goes on to point out that there are other such cases in the world, places, situations of incursion, occupation, and even genocide, where healthcare is targeted. And she said, "When I ask colleagues about their silence on Gaza, even though they confess ignorance in those other cases, they don't say that here. Here, they confess that they fear wading into something so complicated and political." And she continues saying that this is predictable, but in the face of what Gaza, and especially Gaza's healthcare workers, are going through, it is an unbelievably ridiculous excuse. And she finishes, I think it's poignant. "Are we ethicists or not? A complicated, uncomfortable, political ethical problem is no less an ethical problem. Will we be able to say we did what we could? The medics of Gaza are doing their jobs at risk of death, and we need to step up and do ours. Gandhi made a similar point a long time ago in his usual succinct way, just simply saying that the massacre of innocent people is a serious matter. It's not a thing to be easily forgotten, and it is our duty to cherish their memory. One way to cherish the memory of people is to bring people to account for crimes against those people. Well, any watcher of the news will immediately recognize Hirsch Goldberg Pullen. He's actually from the Bay Area, which is near where I live, the San Francisco Bay Area. He was kidnapped from the Ray Music Festival by probably by Hamas gunmen, but who knows, by somebody. Had his arm blown off there by a grenade, and on August 30th, most likely on August 31st, to prevent his rescue by Israeli special forces, he and several other people that were with him were executed by their captors. They were found in a tunnel shortly thereafter. Hundreds and hundreds of news articles have been written about him, and that's appropriate. He's a young man, a young person, wasn't hurting anybody, and he was slaughtered for political reasons. His parents, who are Americans, were repeatedly and, in fact, frequently called by the Biden administration. They both spoke at the Democratic National Convention, I believe, the same day I did. And in general, the death of this young man was seen as the death of any young person who's killed for no reason should be, as a tragedy and as a crime. And the United States actually released indictments against 5 Hamas people who were suspected of being involved in his murder. This is Mahmoud, excuse me, this is, oh my gosh, wow. It's amazing that I know this man personally, and now I can't think of his name. He was a 23-year-old but I do know Hirsch Goldberg Pollen. It's just incredible. He was a Palestinian third-year medical student when I met him. A very bright young man, really, really lovely. He was killed in an airstrike on him and his uncle's home the same day that Hirsch Goldberg Pollen was killed, August 31st. And no article has ever been written about him in English, not that I can find. I actually contacted different reporters who had written articles about medical students in Gaza and the struggles they faced, and told them that he had been killed. That no one was interested, not even at an outlet like Mother Jones. No indictments have been issued because our own government just doesn't even recognize his murder as being the crime that it is. People like us probably do, but that's why it's up to us to impose that understanding on our rulers, whoever they may be. And just a last kind of, I guess, plea for humanity. There was a Swedish novelist named Henning Mankell, who in the late 80s was observing South African atrocities in Mozambique. He was walking towards a village that the US-backed anti-communist forces had destroyed. And he saw a young man walking towards him. And he said, "I'll never forget what I saw then. He had painted shoes onto his feet. He had dug up paint from the soil. And in order to preserve his dignity for as long as he could, he painted shoes on his feet." I thought of that moment where I thought of that passage when I saw this. The man on the screen is Amar Afana. He was in Gaza with me. He's also a trauma surgeon. The man off the frame is showing him something on his phone. He's one of the Palestinian scrub techs. And I noticed his case was scotch tape and some markers. So I asked him about that. And he said, "Oh, well, when I was taken from Shifa Hospital, excuse me, when I was taken from Shifa Hospital, I was let go pretty quickly, along with most of the people that I was taken with. And the Israeli commander told his soldiers that they were not to destroy our cell phones. And then he left. So the soldiers, instead of destroying their cell phones, made them give them all their cell phone cases, broke those, and then walked away. And so, in order to preserve his dignity, this man also painted shoes on his feet. I don't think we should have to keep forcing Palestinians to act like this, and plenty of other people in the world too. And in the end, that's a decision that we have to make, and whether or not we can impose it on our rulers and our society is hopefully up to us. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Feroze. This past hour has been so enlightening to me as a physician and as a person who has been working with MAPA in the past few years. So I really want to thank you for coming tonight to speak with us, to share with us your stories and your insights. First of all, before we move to questions, I want to ask everyone here to sign, if you could put this up, Cole. It's an appeal to Dr. Ann Poblansky, who is the president and CEO of now Mass General Brigham, combined Massachusetts General Hospital and Brigham. You can read it in the chat. We will also send it to you. But basically, we are done with the hospitals in the United States saying nothing about the genocide that is going on. That is not okay. Shame on them, all these hospitals, and we want them to publicly call for an immediate ceasefire and release of hostages, demand that the U.S. End its shameful participation in this genocide, and to call on a release of the hundreds of Palestinian healthcare workers held in dangerous conditions. So please sign this petition. And Cole is showing you how you can do that.
Julie, can I just add something about that?
Pardon. Yes, please.
Yeah, I had a after my New York Times article came out, I had a meeting with a pretty high level State Department person, not cabinet level, but pretty high level, and someone who's specifically assigned to issues in Gaza. And one thing that I asked her was, what do you think? And because I was trying to strategize with her because she wants this kind of stuff to end, but she wants the U.S. support for Israel to end. But she doesn't have the ammunition to make it happen in these meetings. And I asked her, well, what can doctors do? Because obviously writing New York Times articles isn't doing anything. So what can doctors actually do to influence at the government level? And one of the things she said was get important medical institutions to make any kind of statement, anything related to Gaza. So this is not just some idle exercise that you're engaged in right now. This is a really important effort, and I hope everybody will support it.
Thank you for letting us know that. Yeah. All right. I would like to open this up to questions. Abby, you have been closely watching the chat, and yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Sure. Oh my gosh. Dr. Sidhwa,
Correct.
devastating. What? Yes, I will. Devastating, horrific.
Yeah.
Thank you for helping us be witness to what's going on.
Thanks for wanting to be. Not an easy. It's an easy thing to avert your eyes from. Most of the political class does.
Yeah. Someone asked for the article that you referenced, and I think it was what we saw in Gaza, right?
The New York Times article?
New York Times. Was there another one?
Yeah, it's called 65. Just search for New York Times in my name. I've only written one New York Times article. So
I put it here. It's
oh,
65
there you go.
nurses. Right. So I put that there. And something else that you said, I think someone asked you this question, will we be able to say that we did what we could?
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're asking ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, everybody has to do what they can, like I'll give you an example. I was in actually I gave that exact same talk to Jewish Voice for Peace in Tucson, probably in December sometime. And in that during that talk, there were two fellows there, two older fellows, one of whom was a doctor. And they both said, God, wow, you went to Gaza, you're so brave, you're so, lavishing all this silly praise. And I said, well, what have you guys been doing here about this? And they said, oh, we just got out of jail. And I said, what are you talking about? Well, these two guys had just gotten back from chaining themselves to the White House during some White House gala, and demanding everybody acknowledge that there's a genocide going on. Why the hell are you having a gala in in the epicenter of the source of power where that genocide is coming from? So, and now that, these two older men were retired, so they can get arrested. They know they're not going to get, they're both white. They're not going to get beaten senseless. They're not going to get killed. They're just going to get politely arrested, escorted to prison or jail, whatever it's called, let go the next day and charged with some misdemeanor that they can pay a fine for, and it'll be fine. If I do that, I'll lose my medical license. So that's not really an option for me, So everybody has different things so like for me, it's funny. It's actually less brave for me to go to Gaza than it is to chain myself to the White House. And for them, it's the other way around. Fine. Bravery isn't the point. We should all just be focused on doing what we can, to alleviate what we're doing. People in kind of pro-Palestine circles like to talk a lot about I'm pro-Palestine or this or that, but it's always focused on the Palestinians, and that's fine because they're the victims, obviously. But to me, the more important thing is that we're the ones committing the crimes. That's what I think Americans need to recognize, because Americans don't. Well, you go around, what 1 out of 1 million Americans wants to kill children, probably, maybe less.
Yeah.
The other 999,999 don't. And so, getting them to understand what's actually going on, that's why so much effort is put into, obscuring what's actually happening. So
Yes.
everybody does what they can. That's what's important.
Well, I asked that question as a preface for what we are asking about what we can do. And I have a few questions. This is supposed to end at 8 o'clock. Are you available to stay for another 15 minutes to answer these questions?
Yeah, I have to start covering the trauma pager in 5 minutes, but if no traumas come in, then no problem. Yeah.
All right, thank you. So on the note of what we can do, someone asked, so UNRWA was shut down. How are medical supplies brought in, and what can we do to help with an alternative supply chain to reach Gaza?
Nothing. You can't. Let me say that differently. What you can do is tell your congresspeople that you're sick of this. There's nothing otherwise. Right now, they only so when Gaza is shaped like this. Egypt is down here, Israel's here, and the Mediterranean Sea is over here. Israel controls all of this, and Egypt is still here, but Israel has taken this strip of land here called the Philadelphia Corridor. So, one thing that's quite unique about Gaza is that the attacking army controls literally all access to this territory. That's very unusual. Like, Russians can't stop me from going into the Donbass in Ukraine, but so that's very uncommon.
Okay, good.
So and the Israelis, the WHO, it's actually not even just hospitals in Gaza. The WHO is not being allowed to resupply hospitals in the West Bank right now because the Israelis know they're getting away with all this stuff. It's just, you have to remember what the Israeli project actually is. And I don't say this to, I say this to make sure people understand what's going on, and not to impugn the Israelis in any way, because I don't think this is a question about what Israel is doing. It's a question of, like I said, what we're doing.
Yep.
But to know what we're doing, you have to understand what the Israelis are doing. So, the Israelis are trying to depopulate the Palestinian territory. That's all they're doing. It's just a land grab. It's nothing overly complicated. It's been going on for 57, 58 years now, and this is just the latest phase of it. It's not complex.
Yeah,
So and they're taking every opportunity they can to make life basically unlivable. Now in Gaza, that's really reached an extreme level. I mean, it's Gaza was thought to be uninhabitable before October 7th by, if you read UN agencies, and there was no significant amount of potable water. The sewage system was a disaster. The educational system was a disaster. The housing system was a disaster. But but now it's just a totally different. Now it's become you could give bad analogies, but it's become something akin to the Warsaw Ghetto now. So yeah, it's really like I mentioned, talking about getting healthcare supplies into Gaza It's like you're talking it's again you're talking about giving people medicine when they don't have a sewage system, so it's almost a waste of time.
Right. So we have a number of questions, and if I might ask you to give us a short answer to these, just so we'll have time for them. And for the people who've raised your hands, I'm sorry, we won't have time to get you verbally. So if you could put your question, please, in the chat. So someone's asking, Feroze, can we get the article that was not published? I don't know what they're referring to. Do you?
I think maybe I didn't explain myself clearly at the beginning. You did. I think they mean from the very beginning. The article about the winter rains and flooding bringing mass death to Gaza is published in an article in a journal called Foreign Policy. It's there. It's just that nobody cared that it was published. CNN, ABC, NBC, nobody contacted us afterwards. That was the point I was trying to make. But you can read it on foreignpolicy.com or .org. I don't know.
Thank you. How is your academic institution reacting to your activism?
Thankfully, I don't work at an academic institution, so they're not. Actually, I work at a very, and this was a deliberate choice on
Your hospital
decision
How
on
your hospital
my part.
respond?
Yeah. Well, so I work at a small county hospital in inland California. Number one, if they wanted to fire me, they'd have a hard time because I'm a county employee and a federal employee. That's not very likely to happen. And number two, it's very hard to get a trauma surgeon to come work out here because this town is very boring. People in Boston think Brookline is boring. Try coming out to Stockton, California. It's really it's not a great place to live. It's one of the most violent cities in the country. It's an extremely poor area. And so most physicians want their kids to have nicer schools and stuff like that. I personally don't have a family, so it's not an issue for me. But actually, whenever I'm on TV, the administration actually has a viewing party in the administration office. Because they just say, "Oh, look, we're San Joaquin General Hospital is becoming famous." I don't think they understand anything I'm saying on the TV, but they do. So yeah, no, I've actually only had support. But I got to say, I think that's literally unique in the United States. Almost everywhere else, it's been a major problem.
Mm-hmm. Someone's asking if you believe that medical personnel are being targeted. I mean, I think they are based on what we're hearing, but what is your opinion on that?
All I can tell you is that there is no other time when one out of every 20 healthcare workers in the world are in a conflict zone has been killed. That is so completely beyond insane that it's hard to explain. One thing that Norman Finkelstein once said was, if the Israelis aren't targeting children, or for want of targeting children, the Israelis are certainly very good at killing them. And I would say the same is true of healthcare workers. If they're not targeting them, certainly very good at killing them anyway. I think it's pretty obvious that they are being targeted. And the healthcare workers themselves do say that they're being targeted. So for example, when people, or sorry, you said short answers, so forget the example. It's okay.
Oh, thank you. First of all, are nurses getting in to serve like in Gaza and doctors? And also, how is it that you're able to get in? I mean, I imagine you're under the same danger that the clinicians there are in the same danger that they're in.
Yes and no. If the one thing that you have to accept if you're going to work in Gaza or even in the West Bank or Lebanon is that if the Israelis want to kill you, they will do that. And they will completely get away with it. The U.S. government won't say anything. Everything, maybe, we need an investigation. The investigation either won't happen or will be complete nonsense. And that's the end of it. We all know Rachel Corrie was killed. We all know Shireen Abu Akleh was killed. There's a long list of Americans that the Israelis have killed. The Israelis actually attacked a U.S. naval vessel in international waters, killed I think 17 American sailors. They totally got away with that. I mean, it's pretty unusual, I have to say. But yeah, so you just have to accept that if the Israelis want to kill you when you're there, then they will, and there's nothing you can do about that. That being said, it does look bad for them. It's bad press. It's something they have to explain. It's kind of annoying, I suppose. So they don't usually, and you just don't know what they're going to do or what they're not going to do. But I'll tell you, most of the Palestinians felt that the presence of internationals made them a little bit safer for that day, and we were glad that we could provide at least that.
How would the Israelis? I mean, did they know that the internationals are there? and where they are?
Yeah, so when you get there, there's a as all things, it's done through a smartphone app. When we got to the Rafah crossing, and we went to the Palestinian side, the Ministry of Health had some vans waiting there for us. So we got on the vans, and our team leader got on his phone, got on, I don't know what the app is called, but got on the app and requested deconfliction of this point to this point with these license plates, this type of car. So the Israelis know literally where everyone is at every moment. That's why, for example, the World Central Kitchen killings were obviously done on purpose. They knew exactly who they were shooting at, even if they didn't have missiles that have cameras on them, which they do. Even if they couldn't see that these were World Central Kitchen marked vans, they knew full well that they were. And in theory, you're supposed to tell the Israelis anytime you move anywhere. So now, most people don't do that because they're a little bit more sensible. But yeah, so no, the Israelis know exactly where you are at all times.
I think there was another UN van supplying food that was attacked yesterday or so.
It's a daily occurrence. It's impossible to keep track of them.
Yep. Someone is asking for your permission to write an op-ed about the case study of the nurse that was tortured.
Oh yeah, if somebody wants to, I'm happy to. I don't know if anybody will publish it, honestly, because it's but no, if somebody wants to, I'm happy to help you with it. Yeah.
Are you okay giving us your email address, or
Yeah, go for it. Just can somebody?
I'll type it in for you. Do you want to tell
Oh
me?
yeah. Oh, sorry. I'm not very good with Zoom. Sorry. No. Please feel free to give it to that person.
If it's okay, we could put it in the report that goes out tomorrow.
Yeah, there you
link,
go. Please.
with a link to the report.
Anybody's welcome.
Recording.
Yeah.
Okay, so Karishma, you can contact him directly. Someone's asking whether telemedicine is being offered.
Yes and no. Where there's a signal in Gaza also happens to be the hospitals. Actually Mark Perlmutter, who I mentioned, he's a Jewish American physician, orthopedic hand surgeon who's been in Gaza with me. He actually learned about how bad the care was in Gaza because all these the surgeons had actually been killed or had fled. That's what, and while he was doing a telemedicine project there, so that's what inspired him to go there, actually. So there are telemedicine efforts, and anybody who wants to be involved in them definitely should. Again, feel free to get in touch with me, and I can try to find who does them. But you can imagine the addition that telemedicine makes in Gaza right now is minimal. But again, the doctors there are very grateful to have some contact with the outside world because they haven't been able to read journals for literally decades. They haven't had access to anything for decades. So the Israeli siege since 2007 has been unbelievably brutal, and even before that, Gaza was so poor that just they couldn't afford anything. So yeah.
Right. Someone's asking if you know how many people have been killed by now. I don't know that you would. I mean, what we hear is 46,000 from the Gaza Health Ministry, but we think there's another tens of thousands to 100,000 buried under the rubble.
Yeah, so this depends on who you ask. What I would suggest, instead of listening to me give a long explanation, is to look at three things. One is a website called Data Activists, I think it is, maybe dataactivist.org. Just search for Data Activists Gaza death toll, something like that. They go through some of the more authoritative attempts at estimating things. The other one is Air Wars. It's a British NGO, maybe research collective. I don't know what you would call it. They look at modern military's attacks on countries that are largely air-based, and they attempt to estimate based off of a really intensive culling of news sources. So basically everything that's in the public domain, how many people have been killed. And one thing they point out, they just released a report on the first month of the attack on Gaza. One thing that they point out, and this is pretty shocking, in the first 23 days of the attack, which was all bombardment, there was no ground invasion at that time. So it basically October, after October 7th. In that month, the 23 days there, the same number of children were killed as in the deadliest year of the Syrian conflict. And that is the deadliest conflict that has ever been for children. So in 23 days, the US and Israel killed as many children as the Syrians and Russians were able to in an entire year. That's pretty shocking. I'll just give you one other example. Because I want people to understand the number of people who are killed. Like, you know, if you look at Holocaust studies, for example, Raoul Hilberg, I still think wrote the best book on the Holocaust. It's called The Destruction of the European Jews. And in that, he estimated that somewhere between 5 and 5.5 million Jews were killed during the Holocaust. But the standard number that we all learn in school is 6 million. Well, morally, that doesn't, and yeah, if you're a historian, it makes a difference maybe, but morally, that is meaningless, right? It was mass murder of a completely helpless population. And the same thing is going on here. It's maybe less intensive. I don't want to make it exactly apples to apples comparison, but nevertheless, it's horrific. But yeah, but just to give one other illustration of how severe and how incredible this attack is, more children under the age of 2 have been killed since October 7th in Gaza than all Israeli civilians killed in the past 40 years of the Israel-Palestine conflict. Just think about that. More children under the age of 2. That's absolutely, I mean, you know, people will get caught up in talking about, is it genocide? Is it not genocide? It's bad enough to stop. You know, like we don't like, you know, let the lawyers figure it out. Fine. But there is, you know, forgive my language, there's a shitload of unnecessary killing going on, and we are the ones enabling it. I think that's what matters the most.
Totally. It's just so appalling listening to this. Oh my God, it takes your breath away. It takes my breath away.
Yeah.
Once this all ends, which God willing will be very, very soon, what are the top 5 to 10 things to do first in regards to the healthcare system?
You know, so it depends how it ends. Again, I know it's hard to give short answers to these things, sorry, but if there is a ceasefire today, or tomorrow, or, you know, whatever, can anybody imagine that ceasefire is going to involve lifting the blockade of Gaza? No. Just politically not. I mean, again, unless people like you and you guys start having a real effect on policy, it's just impossible. Well, do you know how long the UN estimates that it'll take to rebuild Gaza under the condition of blockade? They said 350 years. The UN estimates that even if Gaza was fully open, all the borders were open, everything, it just became a normal place in terms of access, it would take 15 years just to clear the 45 million tons of rubble that are there. Okay. Like these are outrageous, just totally outrageous things that are, it's again, rebuilding the healthcare system is kind of, it's the last thing to talk about. And again, I just want to emphasize, before you rebuild a healthcare system, people have to have a sewage system. They have to live indoors. You know, a healthcare system is really like way up here in terms of like building your society. Having vaccinations and a sewage system is down here. That's what Gaza needs rebuilt. It's really an extreme situation. But nevertheless, what would be required? A massive influx of material and a massive influx of people who can actually train the young generation, because a lot of the older doctors are dead, or they've fled, and they're definitely not going back.
Oh,
and the same with the nurses and the respiratory therapists and the lab technicians. Like literally you know, the Israelis have been quite discriminated in their targeting of Gaza. They're targeting all of the professional class, the learned people, you know, a lot of Palestinian poets, a lot of artists, like, you know, and doctors are just kind of part of that. They happen to be a particularly brutal part of it because of Israeli propaganda about Hamas using hospitals. But that doctors are just another part of that. They've been trying, you know, the Israelis have been very good at keeping the Palestinians leaderless for a very long time. This is a continuation of that policy.
Oh my goodness. Well, I want to thank you so much. I know that you're on call and we need to let you go. Thank you so much for staying a little extra time to answer these questions. For folks who didn't get your question answered, I'm sorry, we ran out of time. Before you go, Feroze, I want to do something. I want you to see people appreciating. Let's see, I need to remove the pin. Who else is pinned there? Oops. Feroze, can you see the whole gallery?
No, but I did at the beginning, I think.
You can't see the gallery?
I cannot. I can just see Julie.
Cole, I'm removing the
Oh, there we go.
spotlight.
Now I can see.
Okay, so everyone, first of all, could you please thank him in whatever way
You
you
don't have
can?
to. That's okay.
And let's just open, can we unmute everybody?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thank
you.
Gracias.
So much.
Mashallah, mashallah.
Thank you so much.
Message
Thank
get
you.
through.
Shukran.
Thank
May your
you.
message get
God
inspire
bless.
others
you.
for the cause.
God bless
Thank you. I
you.
appreciate
May your message
If-
inspire others to help
And
the
your
cause.
coworkers too.
it.
Thank
You're
you.
a
Feroze.
great If there are questions that I didn't get to answer, if you email them to me, I can try to answer them and send them back.
That's great.
How
Thank
do
you.
you
Well,
stay
what is it?
safe?
Well,
Thank
what
you
is your
so much.
email? We don't. It's not
We're
in the
going to
chat.
send it out afterwards, everyone.
Yeah.
Send a recording and his email address. Thank you, all of you, for participating. And
Thank you,
again,
Feroze.
Feroze.
Thank you.
for us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.